Hi, welcome to today's video. My name is Paul. So this week I'm going to show you 3 or 4 or so recent watercolor landscape paintings and talk through a few points about this sort of style of painting that I use, this sort of very loose, very abstract style. Start off with the idea of why do I paint in this style? Why not do it the proper way, the mainstream way, the more naturalistic, or some people put it realistic way of painting? There are a few reasons. Probably the main reason is to do with individual freedom. If you're painting in a naturalistic way, so your main goal is for your painting to look like reality as closely as possible, you don't have much freedom. You don't have much creative freedom, simply because there are all these restrictions. You have to use the colors that you can see in your reference photo or in real life. You have to include the things that you can see, the proportions and the values and the colors and the composition. All of those things are set out, and it's your job to use your artistic skills to reproduce that. That, to me, is not, there's no freedom in that, or very little freedom. You're doing, your primary goal is just to reproduce what you can see. Whereas with this style of painting, this sort of loose abstract style, if you like to think of it this way, all the creative doors are open. There are no closed doors, no restrictions, no rules. You can do whatever you want. It doesn't have to look like anything. It can just be purely abstract. It could be what I call semi-abstract, which is, it's still sort of a landscape, or anything up to, and even, including a much more representational style of painting. But basically, what I'm trying to say is there are no restrictions. You can do pretty much anything. Use whatever colors, compositions, and so on. In my case, I don't even use any reference photos. It's all just imagination. So complete freedom to paint whatever I want in whatever style, whatever colors, and so on. And that is the main reason why I chose this style of painting. The other main reason, and just as important, I think, is to do with personal preference. I prefer this style of painting. I prefer looking at other abstract or semi-abstract art. I'm not a huge fan of the naturalistic, realistic, hyper-realistic, all of those sort of approaches to art. They don't really do much for me. I said, to me, art is about individual creativity and expressing that in your own way. So reproducing what you can see and what everyone else can see, to me, there's no individuality in that, and therefore I don't see it as artistic, which, I know will trigger and make some people angry maybe. It's just subjective opinions. We all like different things. I'm not saying this style is better or that style is better. It's just different, and I prefer this abstract style. So those are the two main reasons why I chose to paint in a loose abstract way with watercolor. Different media, I have slightly different approaches, but in the case of watercolor, those are the reasons. So let's say there's somebody out there who thinks, well, I would also like to paint in a loose abstract way. What's the best way to do that? And the thing is, there isn't a best way. There isn't one way. There isn't a formula. And there shouldn't be. The whole point, as I say, of this abstract style is it's an individualistic way of approaching art. So you're using your own creativity and doing your own thing. There are no rules, no restrictions, and therefore no formulas that you can follow. And there aren't really tutorials either. You can get advice from people, you can get inspiration, you can pick up ideas and think, I like the way this person is doing that. I'll incorporate that or adjust that to my own style or whatever. But there's no magic formula. There's no rules. But there are some ideas, and the next few minutes in this video, I'll share some of the ideas, not because they're amazing and fantastic, but just they helped me, so I think they're worth sharing. These are not earth-shattering ideas either. It's just little things. So if we start off just isolate the sky. The first thing you can say is this is not a sky. This is just an abstract painting. If you take everything else away, it is just an abstract painting. I think with the paintings, there are three things, at least in my paintings, there are three things that maybe help the viewer to interpret the painting as a landscape. Number one, I tend to use some blue in the sky. Blue is sort of a local color that we associate with the sky. White clouds, blue sky, so on. The other thing is the horizon line. I put in a strong horizon line, and then in the foreground I might have some implied detail, some implication of maybe bushes or foliage, grass or something. And those three things combined, the foreground detail, the horizon line, and the blue in the sky, when you put those together, some people and some machines will interpret that as a landscape. I say some machines, so if I go off at a tangent here, to make this video, to make some of the videos I do, I use Microsoft PowerPoint. This is not an advertisement for Microsoft PowerPoint. It's just a statement of fact, something that I use to make these videos. Anyway, when you're using PowerPoint, you create slides and then you can insert images and text and things into those slides. If you insert an image, it generates, these days, auto-generates some alt text. Alt text it's there for people who have vision impairments. If you're blind, partially blind, of course you can't see the image on the screen, so you're relying more on a screen reader reading out text. In the case of images, you have some alt text. It's just a short description of what the image is. So anyway, the PowerPoint does that automatically these days, and it uses AI to auto-generate a prompt. So the point I'm making here, a long-winded point, is that Microsoft PowerPoint recognized this painting as a watercolor landscape. And I think it did that for those three key elements: the blue in the sky, the horizon line, and some foreground detail that sort of implies vegetation. And those three things alone are what kind of makes my art look like landscapes. But when you isolate the sky or the land, I think it looks more like an abstract painting. It's only when you have those three elements together that it kind of looks like a landscape. Anyway, that was a bit of a tangent, but hopefully I'm sort of making a point. The first point is, if you want to do semi-abstract landscapes where they're still sort of recognized as landscapes, you need some key elements. It's like a language, and you need some key words in there to convey this idea to the viewer or the machine, whatever it is. So, local color in the sky, maybe a bit of blue, a horizon line, and then maybe some foreground detail. If you have those three things, a lot of people will recognize it as a landscape. In this part in the sky, another point I could make is mixing paint. So I've seen a lot of YouTube videos in watercolor, acrylic, whatever it is, where the person is mixing the paint on the palette. So they take, say, two colors. In this case, I'm using two colors. It's Prussian blue and sepia. So let's say those are the two colors. They take the Prussian blue, the sepia, they mix them, and then they apply that mixed color to the paper. I do it a little bit differently. I keep them separate on the palette. So the way I do this is I take a brush and some clean water, and I paint some clean water onto the paper. Not everything, just little bits here and there. So some of the paper is dry, some of it is wet. I then take that clean brush and get a little bit of the Prussian blue and put that down onto the paper. Where I'm putting it down onto the wet paper, you're going to get soft edges forming because the paper is damp, the pigment spreads out, and you get those soft, diffuse edges. The bits where the paper is dry, you'll get dry edges, hard edges. And then I get I clean the brush and I use the same brush again and use some of the sepia paint and put that on. So there is mixing happening, but it's happening on the paper itself, not in the palette. It's a small point, but it does make it a bit of a difference. So it means I have some areas where it's just Prussian blue. I have some areas where it's just sepia, and then there's bits where the two have merged together and mixed on the paper, and it just creates a bit more variety. So again, getting back to this idea with this abstract approach, I'm not trying to represent reality. I'm not trying to paint clouds and sky and the usual things. I'm just creating an abstract image. So for me, the mixing adds to the variety. It makes it more interesting to look at. It has nothing to do with reality. I'm not trying to represent reality. This is pretty much a non-representational way of painting. So it's a little thing, but in a way it all ties back to the approach, the abstract way of thinking, that approach to painting. The other thing I can say about the sky is I did use a little bit of salt in this, just a few grains of table salt, nothing special, the kind of thing you season your food with. You can see it in the center where you get little bits of salt, and as the salt partially dissolves, it sort of clears away a little bit of the pigment and you get these whitish sort of starburst effects. It's just adding texture. It doesn't represent anything. I say, getting back to this idea, it's non-representational art. It just adds a bit of interest. And as I say, the edges also add a bit of interest. So having a mix of hard and soft edges doesn't represent anything. It's just a bit of variety, a bit more interesting. Same sort of thing. I won't go through the whole thing again, laboring these points, but same sort of thing in the foreground. A little bit of salt, mixing a bit of colors. The mixing happens on the paper, not on the palette. Just little ideas like that. Another example, this one maybe more of a springtime landscape. The other thing I could say is limited palettes. I'm a big believer in keeping the number of colors to a low number. In this case, it's just yellow and blue. And the grains, again, they form by mixing on the paper. And you get that with watercolor. If you have damp paper, wet paper, the pigment sort of spreads out. So if you have a yellow next to a blue, where the two meet, you'll get mixing happening, and then you get your greens forming. It's a little bit chaotic, but a little bit of chaos in this style of painting is not a bad thing. It adds a bit of some surprising effects, which can be good, adds to the variety and the visual interest. And again, the sky, I'm not painting a sky, I'm painting abstract shapes, if you like. I'm putting down some blue paint onto wet paper and leaving a little bit of white patches of paper showing through. So maybe it suggests white fluffy clouds floating in a blue sky, but that's not what I was painting, if you like. I wasn't actually painting clouds or a sky. I was just making some abstract marks on a piece of paper. If anybody takes anything away from this video, I think that's the main point. It's this distinction between the naturalistic approach to painting and the abstract or modernist approach to painting. I'm not painting skies and trees and grass and things. I'm just painting abstract marks that can be interpreted as those things. Last example, this one I think I maybe included in a video recently. It's a little bit, I'm experimenting with the watercolor. Once the watercolor is dry, putting on a little bit of charcoal and soft pastel. Again, just creating some visual interest, a bit of a few different colors, some textures. It's just adding visual interest. It doesn't represent anything from reality. Okay, so hopefully, as I say, just sharing some ideas that might be useful. It all comes back to this idea of what's your approach to making art? Do you have a naturalistic approach? And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. That's your thing. That's great. Go with that. If you have this more abstract modernist approach, all the creative doors are open. There are no rules, no restrictions. There are no formulas. There are no, this is how you should paint abstract paintings. Absolutely forget about any of those sort of ideas. If you see anything like that on YouTube, run as far as you can away from those ideas. The whole concept of modern art and abstract art is your individual, expressing your individual creativity, and you cannot have a formula for doing that. Okay, if you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching and listening, and hopefully see you again in next week's video.